Behind the net, centers, flat, tries to Clark, shot, oh, rebound, scores! It's for the game winner at 12 minutes and 1 second of Sunday.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah, and I'm here with Chef B, who's going to tell us about one of our sponsors here. Chef?
Yeah, O&B Puckcast is now brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. The winter months can be especially hard on our homes, from roof damage and peeling siding to frozen pipes and toilet overflows. Call Summit Public Adjusters before you call your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be stressful and confusing. Let Summit Public Adjusters take the stress out of the claim process by having our guys work for you. Get the most for your money and your repairs. The next time the big snow or the rain leaves you with some home damage, contact us for a free consultation. Summit Public Adjusters are licensed in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Learn more at summitpublicadjusters.com or call 215-752-0560. Just tell them that the chef sent you.
Yeah, what was that number again, Chef?
215-752-0560.
That's terrific. All right, we're going to carry on with the rest of our show. And we are back. It is Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode 212. As the Philadelphia Flyers are on a 4-game roll. And of course, I'm your host, Isaiah. And we are brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com. The Flyers are 4-0 since our last episode. They are 29-19-6 for 64 points. And they're doing pretty well. They have not a playoff spot not locked up by any semblance, but with 28 games remaining, it sure looks good. According to Money Puck, the latest odds for them making the playoffs are 77%. And we always have fun with that because we know a couple losses in a row and it goes way down. So it gets skewed. There's 10 games left before the trade deadline. And for all the people that lost faith during that 5-game losing streak, a lot of them are back on board, and they're thinking we have our number one center in Morgan Frost. And, well, you know how it is. A little hyperbole from people on Flyers Twitter. But let's get to our panel. Always to my left, Chef B. How are you?
Hey. Yeah, great. Enjoying the Flyers. Like I said, we talked about it all season. They're going to be ups and downs, and you got to just hang in there. It's going to be a ride. And I will say this, we missed Dan. Glad Dan's back because I do want to say I'll give Morgan Frost props. That was probably his best game in the Flyers uniform was last night. So I'm looking forward. If he can replicate half of that, it should be a fun stretch to this playoff run that we're so 70% sure that we're going to get. So it'll be fun.
At least today was 70% sure. Of course, he is back. The great Dan Silver. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. It's funny. I was just looking at the schedule, and I didn't even – when I was gone 2.5 weeks, work trip, South Africa, London. It's tough. The time zones are tough over there to try and, watch games and whatnot. But I didn't even miss that many games because it was the All-Star break. And I think I spent one entire plane ride, like 10-hour plane ride, like getting the Wi-Fi and tweeting stuff about like Carter Hart and stuff like that. So it was quite a Matt Bay Mitchkov. Anyway, it didn't miss a whole lot. And I was just looking at the schedule. It's funny. I was going to look and see how many NHL teams have had 3 winning streaks of 5 or more games this year. Because if the Flyers beat Toronto on Thursday, it will be their 3rd 5-game winning streak of the year. And we're used to this franchise having these crazy long winning and long losing streaks. And who knows, maybe this could be the start of another one. But there's so much to talk about. I mean, there's I got to give Chef credit. We did a show before the season started, and Chef was talking about how this was going to be a very exciting season, and he was more excited for the Flyers than he had been in a while. I got to be honest, Chef. Like, I was like, what is this guy talking about? I was like, Chef knew something, because this has been quite a crazy and fun and exciting season. So I can't wait to see what happens the rest of the way.
Well, I'll say yes. I'll say, yeah, thank you very much. I knew it was going to be fun. And I'll even say this. I've been consistent. I thought they'd be around 94 to 95 points. And I thought they would miss the playoffs probably by one spot or 2 to 6 points, somewhere in there. And I stick to that, even though they're running on a train right now, because Isaiah alluded to it. The schedule, just those last 6 games alone, is brutal to finish off the season. It's like 3 away or 4 away and 2 home, and it's all guys that are we expect them to be in the mix a little bit, except for maybe, Caps. I don't know where they're going to stand up at the end of the year, but who knows? They'll always play spoilers. But if you look at it, if I went through and I just, in show prep, and I looked at and I picked wins and losses straight down the line of what I thought would happen. And I didn't see them having a big tear winning streak, and I didn't see them having a big losing streak during this whole thing. But I will say this. I was shocked that it came out to 95 points, because I wasn't even counting. So I still think it's going to be fun. And I thank you for the props, but I think they still miss, because I think if you look at the first half of the season and how they finished the first half, and they kind of petered out because they were beat up. And that's what this team does. It lays it out on the line every night. But the problem is it catches up with you. And Isaiah has said it many times too. You block the shots, you get a little, a bruise. You might not be out for a couple, for a week, but, look at Noah Cates, you could go right down the line. And now it's Tyson Forrester with a banged up. Ristolainen is a little banged up. They're going to miss games here
before the All-Star break. TK, definitely.
So
his play went in. Yeah.
So you're going to see that, and that's what I mean. I just can't see them having a full tank of gas for that stretch just to hang in there at the end. And I want them to prove me wrong, but that's just my opinion. I want to be consistent all year, all season.
Well, they have some good numbers. There's some numbers from the Flyers. The Flyers are 22-5-3 when scoring 3 goals plus in a game this season. They also, this past homestand, were 3-0 with a 12-6 goal differential. They were 10 for 10 on the penalty kill, tallying 2 shorthanded goals as well. They're 8-1-0 against the Western Conference in their last 9 games, and 17-8-3 against them this season, including 9-2-2 record versus the Central Division. They have some really nice numbers, and there's only 28 games to play. So I think that the Western Conference is going to produce a Stanley Cup winner this year. I could be wrong. So maybe the depth is greater in the Eastern Conference. But, Dan, the thing is, they came out versus Florida, and they looked like they didn't really even know how to play. They hung in there. They got good goaltending from Ursan, who needed that boost. Looked like everybody needed that break. They came out in the second, third period, and they hung on and got a 2-1 road victory in Florida. I'm guessing you didn't have a chance to see that one. I'm not sure, but it kind of augured well for the rest of this little stretch here.
Yeah, I didn't see the Florida game. I think I was in the air maybe. I did get to see the Jets game. Was the day I got back. And what's fascinating is that the Jets game, they played 1 good period, and they were up 3 or 4-0 after that period. And then they just put it in cruise control the rest of the game. And John Tortorella, after the game and before the next game, basically said, like, I didn't say anything to these guys. Like, they know, like they knew that they needed to play better. And he's basically letting the room police itself, which, is a pretty good indicator of what he thinks of the room. We think, we know that him and almost everyone thinks it's in really good shape. I thought they played a really good all-around game against the Kraken. I thought that was their best all-around game of that 4-game winning stretch. And, the Coyotes game, I didn't even think they played all that great in that game, but basically, they were down 3-2 going into the third period, And it was basically like there was a stat, I think the Coyotes are like 18-1-2 or 18-2-1 when leading after 2. And the Flyers basically came out in the third period and were like, we're winning this game. And that's what they did. They played very well. I mean, it's funny, I was at the Stars game, arguably their best game of the year. They won 5-1. And after the game, I'm tweeting like, let's trade for Elias Lindholm. Like, let's go for it. This team just absolutely dismantled the Stars. And then they lose 5 straight. And it's kind of like, oh, well, I in the back of my mind, I was thinking to myself, I think they just need a reset. I think the All-Star break will be good for them because I do think that they're a very good hockey team. That's what I was thinking in the back of my mind. And it looks like that's what happened. They got the reset. They came back out. I think the big factor of how they play the rest of the season is going to be who they move before the trade deadline. I mean, this is one of the more fascinating type of scenarios I've ever seen from a team going to the trade deadline, because they're a team that is saying that they're rebuilding. Everything that they have said publicly, it's a rebuild, it's a rebuild. We're going to move guys for assets if we can. But now push comes to shove, like what's going to happen? And I'm sure we'll talk about it more on this show, but that is really going to impact how this season finishes out. I think if they kept everyone on this current roster right now, I think they make the playoffs, and I think they make the playoffs comfortably. But if they trade some guys, maybe not.
Yeah, that is interesting because not this past week, but the week before, we had discussed it. Elliot Friedman had mentioned with Jeff Marek that the Flyers are at least contemplating taking another look at Sean Walker, keeping him, maybe dealing Ristolainen, and that could have to wait until the offseason. But Scott Laughton, whether it was before the trade deadline or afterwards, it seems like the organization has settled on it. Maybe it's time for him to go. They re-up Paling, and that could affect things. And it's so up in the air. Chef, why don't you get us started? Because I think the bulk of what we're going to discuss tonight is going to be who stays, who goes, what's the thinking, what are the positive, what are the negatives, and who are some of the players that are rumored for the Flyers to be pursuing or at least looking at.
Okay. So there's a lot in this, and let's tear away the levels here. If the Flyers fall out of playoff contention, I think that's the only time they're going to move Laughton. To Dan's credit, they finally got this room to where it is. And I think they say, you know what? Listen, we can't bring in guys. We're not going to bring in guys to redo this whole thing and mix up the energy that is in this room, because Dan's right. He's like Tort said, he didn't have to police anything. They're doing it on their own, and they're doing a great job of it. And you could tell when they score goals, it's like, what was the other thing with Tort? When Tort said about Kuz, yeah, that was an FU to me. And you see it. This team has that mix. And it wasn't Sealer. It was I forget who said it, but said, I love these guys. I love them. So they're having a great time. You pull somebody out of there. I think the only way you can trade Scott Laughton is if you come at it from a different angle and say, well, we're out of contention and we want to see it. We're doing it for Scotty. We want to see if he can go on a team with a cup run. And I think that's it. I don't think you're going to see many moves at all. I think they'll try, if anything, Ristolainen. They will try to move Ristolainen before I think they move Sealer or Walker, because I think that they're getting more consistency in that pair together. And if you're not going to be a serious contender for 2 years, it makes financial sense. And also, too, Ristolainen's contract, as I said, like last year or the year before on one of our podcasts, it's going to age very well when the cap goes up. And the cap's going to go up next year and probably the year after. We don't know how much, but it's not going to be a chintzy little thing here. And I just think that if you're looking long term, you let these guys just go for it. Hell, you don't mess with the streak. What's that from Bull Doran? Respect the streak, And I think in this fact, you don't want to touch the room because It's a little magical with this crew here right now, and I wouldn't want to mess that up.
Well, I mean, Dan, that begs the question, though, that like, can you, in what is declared a rebuild year, where Tortorella and the whole brass are saying we can't fall in love with guys, when you have a couple players who are UFAs, like, especially most outstandingly Walker and Sealer and Ristolainen has been in demand if you're willing to eat a little cap room. Like, how are you going to get the higher end talent that's going to take you from a playoff contender to a cup contender? This is a dilemma.
So, first off, just responding to Chef's comment about Laughton, I mean, there's only 10 games left before the trade deadline. The Flyers are 8 points up on the next team in their division. I don't see any possible way that this team is not in a playoff spot come the trade deadline. So based on what you're saying, you don't think they're going to trade Laughton, because there's no way that this team is not in a playoff spot come trade deadline.
Do you settle for a second or a third on Laughton, or is he worth one now? So you don't want to undersell, right?
Here's the thing on Scott Laughton is that and Charlie O'Connor was talking about this on the show that he was doing with Bill Mouts earlier today. He's right. If you trade Scott, he's the only guy in that room with a letter. He's the only guy with a letter. He's got the A. He's the alternate captain. He's beloved in that locker room. If you trade Scott Laughton, you're basically ripping out the heart of that locker room. I don't think they're going to trade him unless they get at least a first-round pick, especially with the way that he's been playing his last few games. I mean, he was probably the best player on the ice against the Coyotes, him or Frost. But again, if you're rebuilding and you could get a first-round pick for this guy, that's the fascinating thing, is they could end up selling off players to teams that are lower than them in the standings. Think about that. Like, it almost doesn't make any sense. And I look at the Eastern Conference, none of these teams scare me. Like, I could theoretically see the Flyers making a run and getting to the finals. Like, I don't think it is impossible. You look at some of the teams they've dominated this year. And so they already have 2 first-round picks. Like, Isaiah, your question just now was, okay, if they don't sell, how are they going to get that generational talent? I don't know. Are they going to trade Laughton for the 28th pick in the draft? Like, is that generational talent? I mean,
no, but in combination with one of the other 2 that you have, you can move up.
No one's going to trade a top 5 pick in the draft.
It doesn't have to be top 5. The history of the draft has shown that.
Okay, but if you have 2 first-round picks already, like, I'm not sure that, like, trading Laughton for a first is worth what's going to happen negatively with this team the rest of the way. And here's the thing with Walker. First of all, someone today was saying that Walker was arguably their most consistent defenseman all year long, and I think that might be accurate. I mean, maybe Cam York and Sealer have both been very consistent, but Sean Walker has been consistent all year long, and we don't know what's going on with this injury or with Rasmus Ristolainen. Like, who knows? Remember, early in the season, he had a mystery injury that kept him out for like the first few weeks of the year. What if this Ristolainen injury is like more serious than they're letting on? Can you trade Walker? If Ristolainen's out for a while and Walker gets traded, okay, now you have Sanheim and Drysdale down the right side, and I don't know who you're gonna have Stahl, like, so. And I don't know if you're going to be able to get a first-round pick for Walker. So is trading Walker away for a second-round pick really worth it? Based on what I understand, they are not that close with contract talks with Walker for like an extension. And Briere's sort of looking at it like, hey, like, if he's not going to be here long-term, like, I need to trade him for what I can get this year. I just think based on the current circumstances, I would be hard-pressed to trade Walker for a second-round pick right now. And I guess I'd move Laughton for a first, but there's something to be said for what this team looks like they could potentially accomplish this year and not trading Laughton right now. I don't know. Again, there's no easy answers with this stuff. It's very difficult situation to sort of look at and analyze. They're literally 1 point out of second place in the division.
Yeah, I understand that, but I think people get carried away with a couple games here and a couple games there, and they start pivoting, like in their opinion. Like a classic example is Morgan Frost, right? Morgan Frost has all these numbers about expected goals, and he's in the 60 percentile. But the problem is, the game we saw last night is an outlier. We've seen that maybe 6-7 times this year. What happened the rest of the time? He was either average or below average. And look, we got another year with him, unless they really don't want him here. But if he plays like this, he's going to go into his next year. So I just think we need to make judgments based on 10 game blocks. And we're already 50 plus games into the year. Laughton has not played well this year. And if he's increasing his stock, and the big picture that we've been talking about going into the year, don't fall in love with players. We
Absolutely.
know where we're at. And they've repeated that theme. It's been a motif for them. I still think they're going to have some hard decisions. We already know that. But I do think they are going to be active. And yes, they could be active with a team like Buffalo. And then it just becomes like, wait a minute, why don't we want Casey Mittlestadt? He's clearly better than Peyton Krebs. These are two names that have been associated with the Flyers. And Chef, Dan, you'll give a chance, but I do want Chef to weigh in on some of that discussion as we turn towards that.
Well, also, too, if you're not getting a first for Laughton, like Dan says, I don't know if it's worth it. I don't worry, because then you kill the whole locker room and you're trying to run into the playoffs and do a little bit of damage at least. I mean, we've seen the teams, if who could they get? They could go into a 7-game series with Tampa, Carolina. There's a couple of names in there, and they've measured up pretty well against a couple of those teams this year. So if you're not getting the first, you can't tear the heart out of the room. I fully believe that, and I agree with Dan in that sense. But now, if you're going to make some trades or make some deals or something like that, and you're breaking even on there, but long term, who would you rather have, Risto or Walker? I mean, I think there can be a deal to be made for Risto. I think Toronto might come knocking if he's healthy, and I think there's a chance if you hold back some salary, and if you hold a little bit of salary, why not? I mean, you've done it before, and if we're not worried about it, you get a little break from the cap. You're going to have long term IR. I think there's money to be moved around, let's just say. So I think you can get those centers that you're so talking about. You're so I just think you could do that and still do all the stuff you want to do without giving players. You got to, for the once in a long time, we have not seen this team negotiate from higher ground with their draft capital. So now you can get what you want for what you're asking for, So I think it's a hard pass if you don't get a first.
Okay, but for who are you talking about now? For Laughton,
for Laughton, and then what if you're talking about trading stuff and being able to pick up? Okay, you can work a 3-way deal. You can free up a little bit of money for the centerman you were talking, the centers that you were talking about, by getting rid of Risto. If you hold a little bit of salary here and there, there's deals to be made.
All right, let me stop there and just and hone in on something, because the Risto is problematic. He's got 3 more years after this year, and do you really want to retain salary? And that, I think you can only retain salary on, what is it, Dan? Is it 3 players? Because they have 2. They have 1 right now that they're retaining salary on.
Yeah, you can only retain salary on 3 players. Right now, they're only retaining on 1, which is Kevin Hayes. Yeah. But they're retaining on Kevin Hayes through the end of 2026. They were going to have to be retaining on Tony DeAngelo, but the way that worked out is they bought him out. So they're only using 1 of their 3 retention spots.
So that, to me, adding Risto into that is a little bit of problematic and may interfere with the kind of flexibility they're going to need down the road. And just to answer a question that you asked me a couple minutes ago, Walker's been better than the rest of the line. And even though it is a smaller, maybe more finesse kind of defense, except for Sealer and Ristolainen. Walker's just been so much better, and he fits with this system. See, I think he's a system fit kind of defenseman. The way he jumps into the play and uses his discretion. He's had some mistakes, but that is one of the better second pairings with him and Steeler in the entire league this year. And they played well, and they played some of the toughest competition. Sometimes they get their butt whipped, but still, they get their butt whipped from the top of the roster down to the bottom against teams like Boston and the Rangers. And if they had to play them in the playoffs, they're going to lose. We know that. Okay, that's just the way it is. But outside of that, most of the East is not as daunting. I'm probably forgetting some other team that they struggle with. But I don't want to lose, and I don't think they're going to lose sight of the fact that they're trying to build a cup contender. And they have to be willing to make short-term sacrifices if they think that heart of the room is now kind of ingrained in all of them, and that Couturier's here and he can take some of that. If they come back, if they trade Laughton to Buffalo, where he's rumored to be, him and Jenner are two guys that the Sabres want, because they need more culture in their organization. They have more talent than the Flyers. I mean, look at the roster. They do. But if we came back with a kid like who's, to me, he's like a second coming of Paling in Peyton Krebs, and he comes back and he's a pain in the neck to play against. He could be part of the return for Laughton. I'm not that crazy about it because his numbers are in the toilet, but he's been playing with guys like Zemgus Girgensons, who's, gurgling up 4 goals all year. So I don't know. There's a lot to consider.
Well, first, let me say, you mentioned Casey Mittlestadt first.
Yeah.
You know who Casey Mittlestadt is? And maybe he's a little bit better, but he's a 1-year-old version of Morgan Frost.
Yeah.
Like, Casey Mittlestadt could do no pull-ups at the combine. He's kind of like had to add strength. And now he's finally developed into a more consistent type of NHL player. But also, I think Anthony DeMarco posted on Twitter that the Flyers don't have interest in Casey Mittlestadt, which I completely believe. The reason that some folks in the front office maybe are looking to move Morgan Frost is because he plays too much like Casey Mittlestadt. Like, that's not the kind of player that the Flyers want to add. They are not looking to add finesse types of centers. Peyton Krebs, on the other hand, kind of fits the mold of what like Jonesy and Torts sort of like going after. And he's 23 years old. He was taken 17th overall in 2019. And a lot of people, he's the kind of center reclamation project the teams look at and say, hey, this guy's being misused in a bottom 6 role in Buffalo. He's stuck behind some really good centers there. And we think that there's a lot of potential there. And that's the kind of guy that I could see the Flyers going after. Mittelstadt, I don't think the Flyers are going after. Morgan Frost, because Isaiah, you were talking about him a little bit. I think that ever since that meeting he had with Torts, I think he's been pretty damn good. I think he's been one of the better forwards on the Flyers, one of the better players on the Flyers since that meeting that he had with Torts. And as I understand it, Jonesy's never been a big fan of Morgan Frost. And Torts, not a big fan. But last night after the game, Torts said that he thought it might have been the best game that Frost has ever played in a Flyers uniform. And you said, Isaiah, he's got 1 year left on his contract. He can force them to not trade him, I think, if he keeps playing like he did last night. And that's going to be key, because if Morgan Frost is going to become a top 6 center on this team, then he's going to have to find that consistency. I thought he was sensational against the Stars a few weeks ago. I thought actually he was better in that game than he was last night. And then I thought he was really good against Seattle and also good against Arizona. The thing with Frost, when he's playing well, last night he was hitting guys. He was he's forcing turnovers in the offensive zone, stripping the puck from guys.
Yep.
He has so much potential. And maybe he's on his way to getting there. If the rest of the year he keeps being inconsistent, or in the next few weeks he's inconsistent, maybe they look at moving him, right? Like when they were talking about trading for Peyton Krebs, my thought was, maybe Frost is a guy that might be, involved in that deal. But I hope he keeps playing well, and I hope they don't trade him, because he does bring a skill set that not a lot of players on this team have. Nick Seeler and Walk. It's funny. Nick Seeler, remember 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, everyone was talking about him as a possible trade deadline move. Now, nobody's talking about Nick Seeler. I find that kind of interesting.
Well, that's because Freach comes out and says he'd be more surprised than not if Seeler is not re-signed.
No, I know that, but that alone is nobody is now talking about Nick Seeler. It's just a little strange to me.
Hey, I hear you. I just want to put, yeah. Like in other words, that he will be traded.
No, I'm just
normally quiet.
I'm just making a comment that I think it's interesting that everyone was talking about Seeler as a guy that the Flyers look to move at the deadline, and now no one's talking about it. I understand what Fried said, but I don't know. We'll see what happens. It's the Bruins lost in the first round last year. They had the best record in the history of the NHL. They lost in the first round. I know it was to the Panthers, who made the Cup Finals, and they're a better team than should have been playing the top seed in the NHL. But anything can happen. And Sam Ersson has been good. I think that the Flyers' defense is extremely good. I think that's a big reason why I don't think that they're just a fluke this year. Their defense from top to bottom, I think, has been very good this year. And you basically added Drysdale for nothing because Cutter Gauthier is not on the roster. So you added a kid who's got all this offensive dynamism, who is going to improve the power play. You saw it last night. The first few power plays, they were finding their way with him on the top unit, but I think they started getting better towards the end of the game. I think that some things could happen here. We'll see.
Yeah, just one thing, Chef, before I just want to put a cap on Casey Mittlestadt, because there's a lot of people that are just, have a lot of desire for the Flyers to pick this guy up. And I think Dan addresses part of that in that he's very similar to Frost, but it goes beyond that. Okay, he is an arbitration eligible restricted free agent. So that whoever acquires him has to really make a commitment to him, because after that, he's a UFA. He can walk right to a restricted free agency. So what's it going to take to get him? Then are you willing to let him walk after 1 year, or do you want to make a commitment to a guy who's never been in your room, who you don't have a lot of information about? So just going out and getting Mittlestadt, because we need centers and we don't have anybody prospectively coming here, when they probably need a guy who is like another notch above him to add to the center group that we do have. Like, I put out something through the account where I compared Frost, Mittlestadt, Sean Couturier, and the guy that we really need, the kind of guy we really need to add to this bunch, which would be someone who has numbers like Sebastian Aho. And by numbers, I'm not only talking about goals and assists, I'm talking about impact on shooting metrics, expected goal, like a game score kind of thing. So I just wanted to put that out there, because I didn't want people to think we were blowing it off. It's a big thing on Flyers Twitter right now. You have to say, okay, we do this, but okay, what's it going to cost us? What are we going to pay? Or are we ready to let him walk after expending some assets in a rebuild situation? That doesn't make sense. Chef, sorry about that. You go ahead.
No, absolutely. I agree with you there. Why pay for a potential of what you have and compared to what you have already? So that's my take on it. But the other thing is, Dan had touched on it, the defense of this team in the third periods. And I think I sent you a text about, there's a couple stretches, and I think in these last two third periods, well, maybe not the last two. I think the two stretches in two of the games in this winning streak here, that they've gone up either a little bit over 10 minutes in the third period without giving up a shot on net, which I thought was incredible. It's just one of those things like, and even when they even when they gave up, I think there was 4 or 5 in a couple of those games, and it's all outside. They're keeping the play to the outside. They're playing in, like you said, a system-based thing, and that's where I think it lends better to having Walker than Ristolainen in that case. But I digress. Go ahead, continue.
Yeah, but I think also, and you look at a guy like a Drysdale coming in, he's a 21-year-old defenseman, and he's still got a lot of work to do. He's a work in progress. We put out there last night. He's not a project, though. He's got a lot of talent, but it's a good thing that he gets into a zone coverage defensive scheme like the one that the Flyers have. And I think that's something that really helps Scott Walker, too. I mean, Sean Walker, I was saying Scott. But yeah, Sean Walker, I think, benefited from that as well. So there's the team defense is every bit as important as the actual defenseman. And you see a lot of guys coming back. And when the defensemen become that rover that Torts talks about, it's pretty rare when the Flyers are on top of their game to see a forward not covering that player. And Forster's been good like that. That's one of the areas that Tippett's been good at. So the defensemen have more willingness or more engaged offensively, and it's been creating stuff. There's no doubt about it. Just the other night, I forget what game it was, where Walker makes that play, perfect pass to Farabee, and Farabee just kind of gets it over to what was it, Konechny, and it was a great play. It was like almost like a tic-tac-toe kind of play, but that Walker has to make that pass to Farabee that he can handle and make such a really good finesse play to make it all happen.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, you know what? It's funny because he hasn't scored in like 6 or 7 games. He's got a couple assists here and there, but consistently, Farabee has been been one of their best players this year. I mean, he's always there. What that Mike Up night was awesome too. You know where I'll find me? I'm like insurance, right by the net, and that's where he's scoring all of his goals. So more credit, but more so than anything else, he's really had some nice setups to other players on this team too. And to his credit and Morgan Frost credit, the last couple of games here, they both have been playing. Their defense is a hell of a lot better, even earlier this season. I mean, they really stepped it up. They obviously somebody's gotten through it because you see what the results are when you play as a team, and that's what they're doing. And I think it just lends itself to this whole like little magical little thing they got going. I'll keep saying it. It's very intriguing to me to see what could possibly happen. So.
Yeah, I'm Morgan Frost with a really interesting move on the penalty shot. It was the Flyers' 4th penalty shot goal of the season. He has 4 points in his last 3 games, and he owns 10 points versus Coyotes in his last 5 contests against them. It's a shame we can't play them more often. Dan?
Yeah, the penalty shot goal from Frost, that's a sign of a confident player right there.
Yeah.
When you can just take your time like that, go in slowly, not force it, and then pick your spot. And it was a great spot. He waited for the goalie to just kind of like twitch his left arm, created a little bit of space between his arm and his body. It was really nice. I think that I get a little annoyed when people start saying that Morgan Frost only shows up against bad teams. I think he's an inconsistent player, but I don't think he only shows up against bad teams. Like I said, the Stars are one of the best defensive teams in hockey, and I thought that was arguably his best game of the year. So that whole argument doesn't do a whole lot for me. But it's interesting. I mean, I think he's been better than Sean Couturier recently. And
recently, yeah.
Not for the whole season, but I think recently he's been better than Couturier. And that's just going to be interesting to see what happens with him. I wonder if Brink might end up coming back up at some point to kind of add some depth, especially if Forster is out midterm with this lower body injury. I think he blocked a shot, right?
Yes.
I'm hearing
it's either a very deep bruise or a break.
I'm hearing it may be worse than initially thought, which makes me think maybe he's got a fracture in there. So he could be out for a little period of time. And then again, we'll have to see what happens with Risto. But yeah, I mean, there's just so much that's going to be fun to watch. Now we got a little road trip coming up, the Leafs and the Devils and the Blackhawks. So that Devils game that's going to be a big game for both teams, the outdoor classic.
Yeah, the
Yep.
Devils are actively seeking goaltending, and some of the moves they make, even if they're saying to themselves, okay, let's act on the assumption we're not going to make the playoffs this year. Everything's been a cluster F, but we have to do something to show the fans that we're still in this. We last year was not a fluke. I mean, they have tremendous talent. They got more guys. It's like an assembly line of talent. And Nemeth has been, really good for them this year for the most part. And Hamilton's coming back, I believe. So I think they're going to try and get a goaltender. They've been in the market for Korpisalo at the low end, and at the higher end, Markstrom. And then that gets into a conversation that we're not going to really get into about what the heck is going to happen in Calgary. So, and some of these teams like Calgary and Winnipeg, I mean, that's where a guy like Ristolainen seems like he would end up going, because they can't get anybody to stay in their particular markets for different reasons. Winnipeg, it's pretty obvious. It's what they call GU, geographically undesirable. So, I mean, that's the problem with Winnipeg in terms of if you want to play hockey there. So it's not even whether you like Winnipeg or not. It's like there's other guys who may not want to stay. So the whole thing is shrouded in a kind of doubt about the stability of the franchise. And of course, we just had Arizona at Mullet Arena. If you're lucky, if you can play the capacity at 5,000 seats, and that thing looks like it's going to fall apart. But we'll get whatever our national guys talk about that. So yeah, they got Toronto coming up tomorrow. No, that is Thursday night. Then Saturday night, the big outdoor game at what's that, Giant Stadium?
MetLife Arena.
Yeah, it's in MetLife in East Rutherford. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And then they're off until next Wednesday, the 21st, where they play Chicago, and that might feature the return of Connor Bedard. So that's interesting. So, Chef, any comments about some of those games?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think they're, in their current road trip, I think they need to get at least 3 points. And if they're only going to beat one team, because it's going to be tough for them, I think they rise to the occasion at the Stadium Series game. I'll have my Stadium Series chef coat ready to go, and but yeah, I think that's the big game the Devils want. You want to show everybody on the national stage that hey, look, we're a lot better. Keep an eye on us. That we're not dead. Don't count us out, kind of thing. So it should be interesting. I mean, with the Blackhawks, I sure as heck think they got a chance to win, but I'm hoping they come away with 4 points. I'll be happy with 3. It'll be disappointment if they only have 2.
Yeah. Now that weekend coming up after the Chicago game is a big one for them. They have the Rangers in afternoon game at 3. It's scheduled for 3 now. I don't know if they changed it or whatever, because usually that would be 1 o'clock. But it's an ABC game at home, and they struggle with the Rangers.
Football's over.
Yeah,
For college football, everything's over. That's why it's 3 o'clock. It always does that, right?
I'm going to take your word on that. And then the very next day, a TNT game against the Penguins on the road. The Penguins did a nice number, not so nice number on the Flyers the last time they played. And I think, at that point, it'll be inevitable, I think, that the Flyers will make the playoffs unless they really go through a tailspin. If they go like 500 through that stretch, it's going to be tough to keep them out. And then, of course, that's 5 more games. There'll only be 5 games left before the trade deadline. Some other decisions will be made. I think we should, before we call it a night, because I think we covered most of what we wanted to deal with tonight. I think the Flyers, by necessity, because of their statements from last year going into this year and the recent, we're going to build this the right way, we're not going to fall in love with players, I really believe the Flyers are going to make a trade at least one trade that surprises some people. And it may detract a little bit from the roster for now, but perhaps it'll bring a player who ends up being like Poehling, or hopefully a better. I like Ryan Poehling, but look, you don't become a contender with those kind of players. But it could be like a Krebs or somebody else that gives them a player for the future because they feel like they have to, or they get a draft pick or something, because they don't want to miss the opportunity to stack up assets. Because if you look across the way and you're looking at the New Jersey Devils have a much better chance of winning the Stanley Cup than the Flyers because they have that high level talent. And I think that's going to resonate when they watch the two teams play. Even if the Flyers outplay them, the Devils are just having one of those years. That's my feeling. Dan, what say you?
Yeah, I'm just learning more and more every year that there really is something to be said to coaching in the room and cohesiveness.
Mm-hmm.
The Devils and the Sabres, you've already said, have much better rosters than the Flyers. I mean, the Flyers have many more points than the Sabres do this year, and they've been playing better than the Devils do. The Devils have got top 5 elite talent in Hughes, both Hugheses. Simone Nemitz is very good. Nico Hischier is very good, but something's just sort of not there. And they've had a bunch of injuries. Hamilton's been out most of the year, and Jack Hughes has been out for a decent chunk of time, and maybe they'll go on a run. But their goaltending is struggling. And so, I just, again, I agree with you that I think we might see some surprising moves happen. I don't know what they're going to be, but, we were obviously shocked when Cutter Gauthier was moved, and we found out why that was. But, yeah, I think that they'll have some moves that people are going to be like, sort of like, what was that at first? And then we'll kind of have to see how it plays out. But it really, I mean, there's less than a month now until the trade deadline. And the trade deadline's March 8th. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens. I wonder how much of how they play on this 3-game road trip might factor into what they do. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. Again, I want to see what happens with some of these injuries. If Risto is going to be out long term, does that mean you're still going to move Sean Walker? Like, I don't know.
It depends on the return. I think at the end of the day, they're going to have to weigh and measure that, Chef.
The next 10 games you said till the trade deadline. My stuff, my picks, I have them going 4-5-1. So it'll be close, I think, but I think they hold fast. They might trade somebody, like you said, that not expected. I think it'll be somebody other than Scott Laughton. No, I think they value him too much right now, unless they get that number 1 pick, or unless they really tanking. Because the teams they are playing in the next 10 games, they could easily go, 2 wins, 8 losses or whatever in that stretch where they really drop down. And then I could see the desperation kicking in and making sure that we get that extra first-round pick. I can see that then. But other than that, I'm sticking to what I said.
Okay. I just think before we close tonight, we should give some kudos to a guy who's been placed in the spotlight, and we all were expecting it. But when it actually happened and Carter Hart is gone, Samuel Ursan, after getting a break and probably a reset that he needed, has really been sparkling. And even last night, if his numbers don't hold up in terms of a 1-game save percentage, I think as people have watched this game for so long, Arizona is the kind of team that has really elite, high-skilled players, and they just haven't come together as a team. But if you take a guy like Logan Cooley or Clayton Keller and you give them a look in front of the net, they'll bury it with like the top 20% of the forwards in the league, because either the potential is there or, like, Keller has already proven what kind of player he is. And Ursan made some really big saves last night in a greasy win that the Flyers really didn't want to let go of the points, and they were able to pull it out. Really, essentially, because he has excelled this year at making the timely save. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. And, Peterson comes in, does his job. They're going to probably need Cal Peterson for probably 5 or 6 more games at least. And we'll see what happens from there. Dan?
Since you mentioned it, Keith Jones had an interview, I think, with the Snow the goalie guys.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about the goaltenders in the system. And Jonesy made a comment about how they've got a bunch of goalies over in Russia, And some of them might be here sooner rather than later, which is really interesting when you look at Alexei Kolosov, who I think he's 22 or 23 years old. He's been in the KHL for a number of years now, playing for Dynamo Minsk. They're going to make the playoffs, which start in late February, but they're not a very good team. So they'll probably get bounced in the first round, which means that as of early March, it's conceivable that Alexei Kolosov could come over to the U.S. and start his entry-level contract. Now, I think they'll want to get him some games in the AHL, but I can't imagine who else Jonesy could have been talking about when he says that some of these Russian goalies might be over sooner rather than later. So that's going to be something to watch. Cal Peterson was good in the game that he played. The Flyers won. He's not going to be a great backup by any means. Goalies can get hot. We know that. But that's one thing that'll be interesting to watch is if Kolosov comes over when his season is over with Dynamo for the KHL.
Yeah. I mean, some people are always like, oh, Fedotov? No, I don't think so. But yeah, I think we're going to kind of call it a wrap there. And let's go with some final thoughts for tonight, starting with you, Chef.
I'll say this. My final thoughts are have fun, man. And my one I have, for people who don't know, I have 5 brothers. We were our own hockey team growing up anyway. But so in fact, 2 of them texted me after the Super Bowl, right after that ended, and said, well, hockey season has now really started. So it has. So all eyes are on hockey right now. So enjoy it. Now that you're paying more attention to the Flyers, where other stuff has taken precedence over the winter so far, just manage your expectations. It's still a young team. It's still a very inexperienced and not very skilled team, but they're playing with heart. They're playing with everything, and they're going to exceed your expectations if you let them. But don't expect them to be like Stanley Cup champions this year. Just enjoy the ride and know that when Eric Lindros got the heart thing, he goes, we're getting better. They are getting better. This is the same thing, they're getting better. You just gotta let it cook, paraphrase it, and then you'll get a good meal at the end of all this.
Okay. And people can find you on X?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, on X. You can find me on X at Chef to the left B on X. Chef, the number 2, the left B.
You got it. Dan?
If you make a chart right now of like all the potential outcomes for the Flyers for the rest of the season and what could happen, I think it's probably going to have the biggest variety of outcomes of any team in the league at this point is what I'm thinking. And there's so many factors that could sort of impact it in one way or another. We don't know how Samuel Ersson is going to do the rest of the way as the guy. How much can Jamie Drysdale improve his play and improve the power play over the remaining course of the number of months? Are they going to move Scott Laughton and Sean Walker? Can Morgan Frost keep up this level of play? Like, there's so many factors that could influence how this team goes, and it's going to be fascinating to kind of watch it play out. So I'm excited to sort of see what happens here the rest of the way. And folks can find me on X, Twitter at dsilver88.
Fantastic. And of course, you can follow the O&B Puckcast on the app formerly known as Twitter at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. We have a backup plan on Getter at O&B Puckcast, at O&B Puckcast. And if you could rate and subscribe, it really, really helps move us up the charts. If you could subscribe or follow whatever your particular platform calls for, you can follow us on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, Amazon Audible, Deezer. We have a YouTube channel. Just plug in there, O&B Puckcast, and we have a Facebook page as well. It helps move us up the charts if you follow or subscribe when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcast, which, of course, we are. So until next time, everybody, thanks for listening and take care.